10 Deep Lessons from the Book. Read people like a book. Number 1. Have you ever met someone who seemed to just have a natural gift for getting other people? They appear to be blessed with an instinctive understanding of how other people tick and why they behave as they do, to such an extent that they can often predict what they'll say or feel. These are the people who know how to talk so that others really hear them, or the people who can quickly detect when someone is lying or trying to manipulate them. Sometimes, such a person may perceive someone else's emotions and understand their motivations to a degree that even exceeds that person's insight into themselves. It can seem like a superpower. How do they do it? The truth is that this ability is not really anything mystical, but a skill like any other that can actually be learned and mastered. While some might call it emotional intelligence or simple social awareness, others may see it as more akin to what a clinical psychologist or psychiatrist may do when they conduct an intake interview with a new patient. Number 2. Many people believe they're good with people. It's very easy to boldly claim that you understand another person's motivations without ever really stopping to check if you're correct. Confirmation bias, unfortunately, is a more likely explanation, i.e., you remember all those times your assessments were correct, and ignore or downplay the times you clearly got it wrong. That, or you simply never ask if you're right in the first place. How many times have you heard, "I used to think so, and so was such and such kind of person, but once I got to know them, I realized I was completely wrong about them." The fact is that people are often far less accurate judges of character than they like to believe. If you are reading this book, chances are you know that there are a few things you could probably learn. It never hurts to start a new endeavor on a blank slate. After all, nothing can get in the way of learning truly effective techniques like the conviction that you know everything already and don't need to learn. So, with that in mind, what are the obstacles to becoming brilliant at reading people? Firstly, the biggest thing to remember is the effect of maybe you've seen a listicle online to the effect of 5 telltale signs someone is lying, and went on to see if you could spot any in real life. The trouble with this is obvious. Is the person looking up and to the left because they're telling a lie, or has their attention simply been caught by something on the roof? And the same way, a person making an interesting Freudian slip in conversation could be telling you a juicy secret about themselves, or they could simply be sleep-deprived and literally just made a mistake. Context matters. In the same vein, we cannot take a single statement, facial expression, behavior, or moment to tell us something definitive about the whole person. Have you not already done something today that, if analyzed alone, would lead to some completely nonsensical conclusions about your character? Analysis can only happen with data, not a single datum, and it can only happen when we are able to see broader trends. These broader trends also need to be situated in the cultural context that the person you're analyzing comes from. Some signs are universal, whereas others can vary. For example, talking while your hands are in your pockets is looked down upon in most cultures. Eye contact, on the other hand, can be a tricky affair. In America, eye contact is generally encouraged because it is considered a sign of honesty and intelligence. However, in places like Japan, eye contact is discouraged because it's thought to be disrespectful. Similarly, a set of cues may mean one thing in your own culture and something entirely different in another. It can be slightly difficult to remember these different models of interpretation initially, but as you practice the art, it'll start coming to you naturally. If a person does the same unusual thing 5 times in a single short conversation, then that's something to pay attention to. If someone simply claims, "I know that woman. She's an introvert. I saw her reading a book once," you wouldn't exactly call them a master at unraveling the human psyche. Another way that smart people can come to not so smart conclusions about others is if they fail to establish a baseline. The guy in front of you may be making lots of eye contact, smiling often, complimenting you, nodding, even touching your arm occasionally. You could conclude that this guy must really like you, until you realize that this is how he is with every person he meets. He in fact is showing you no interest above his normal baseline, so all your observations don't quite lead where they ordinarily would. Finally, There's something to consider when you're studying other human beings, and it's often a real blind spot: yourself. You might decide that someone is trying to deceive you, but completely fail to take into account your own paranoid and cautious nature and the fact that you were recently lied to and are not quite over it yet. This final point may ironically be the real key to unlocking other people, making sure we understand ourselves at a bare minimum before we turn our analytical gaze outward. If you're unaware of how you may be projecting your own needs, fears, assumptions, and biases onto others, your observations and conclusions about others will not amount to much. In fact, you may have simply discovered a roundabout way of learning about yourself and the cognitive and emotional baggage you're bringing to the table. Number 3. Have you ever been in a conversation with a group of people only to later find out that different members of the group had a completely different assessment of what happened? Sometimes, people disagree entirely on whether someone was flirting, whether someone was uncomfortable or offended, whether someone was feeling off or being rude. It can feel like you were living in two separate realities. Some studies show that only about 7% of our communication comes from actual spoken word, whereas a whopping 55% of it stems from body language. This means that what people say is often the worst indicator of what they actually want to convey. Even their tone of voice only tells you about 38% of the actual story. One can now see why people often leave group conversations with contrasting opinions on what really took place in that interaction. They're using the wrong factors to arrive at their judgments. Number 4. Why bother to understand people at all? Why go to the trouble of learning about how people operate, and why, if you think back to any situation in which you were desperately trying to get a read on someone, it might have been because you were very invested in how they would else, trying to understand why they had already acted as they did. To understand why people behave as they do, we need to examine the causes and drivers of that behavior. Their motivations. Everyone, including you, is driven to act for some reason or other. You may not always see or understand that reason, but there is one. Only insanity has a person acting for no reason at all. So to get a grip on any behavior, to understand it, predict it, or even influence it somehow, you need to understand what is fueling, i.e., you need to understand what motivates a person. Why did you pick up this book? Why did you get up this morning? Why have you done any of the no doubt hundreds of things you've already done today? You had your reasons, conscious or unconscious, and another person might gain considerable insight into who you are by knowing what those motivations were. Number 5. It's an old cliché. A bald and overweight middle-aged man zooms by in an expensive, noisy red sports car, and people on the sidewalk remark, "Gee, I wonder what he's compensating for." It's just a coarse joke, but it speaks to a common understanding of the fact that sometimes people are driven by unconscious inner forces that they may not necessarily see themselves. You may be familiar with Swiss psychologist Carl Jung's concept of the shadow. To put it very simply, the shadow contains all those aspects of our nature that we have disowned, ignored, or turned away from. These are the parts of our being we hide from others, and even from ourselves. Our pettiness, our fear, our rage, our vanity. The idea is that when we integrate our shadow, we cultivate a deeper feeling of wholeness and can live as authentic, complete human beings. You see, Jung didn't care about positivity and self-improvement in the sense that's popular today. He thought that psychological health and wellness came from acknowledging and accepting of yourself, rather than in pushing the unwanted parts of yourself further and further away. It can be enormously gratifying to do shadow work, i.e., to consciously attempt to reclaim those disinherited parts of yourself. But how can we use this concept to help us better understand those around us who also possess shadows? The thing about the shadow is that even though it's pressed out of conscious awareness, it still very much exists. In fact, it may make itself known in more subtle ways, manifesting itself in behavior, thoughts, and feelings, or appearing in dreams or unguarded moments. If we can observe and understand these outward signs in others, we can gain a deep insight into their character. We live in a world of duality. Dark exists because of light. We only understand up because of down. and what is high energy must eventually slow and stop. Simply understanding this principle can help us understand people too. We are all a blend of complementary, connected, and interdependent forces. Like the yin-yang, each gives rise to and balances the other. Imagine someone who was raised in a strict household and pushed to do well academically. No late nights, no drinking, no friends over. Only study all day every day. You could look at such a person and notice how profoundly unbalanced or polarized their being is. Their conscious mind is focused on only one aspect of their being, but what happens to their impulse to be free, to rebel, to play, to be a bit wild? Where does it go? You probably know a few people who lived childhoods exactly like this, and the way the story goes may seem very familiar. In early adulthood, such a person finally succumbs to the long repressed and hidden needs for freedom, expression, and rebelliousness, and goes wild, abandoning their studies and living it up almost as though they were making up for lost time. Number 6. Another related way of looking to people's deeper motivations is to recognize and acknowledge their inner child. We can understand the inner child as that unconscious part of ourselves that represents the little children we once were. After all, it's usually in childhood where we learn which parts of us are acceptable and which aren't. And hence it's the time we start to build up our shadow and shape our conscious personality. Doing inner child work sounds a little out there, but it's really not that different from gently acknowledging and embracing the shadow aspect. If you were doing inner child work on your own or with a therapist, you might engage in a playful dialogue with your inner child, journal, draw, and paint, and get into the mindset of a compassionate adult who then reparents the younger version of yourself, giving yourself everything you needed back then but didn't receive. How can we use the theory of the inner child to help us become better at reading people? In the same way we can learn to identify when someone is operating from their shadow, we can see if someone is motivated particularly from their inner child. If you're having an argument with a partner and they're angry and defensive, you may suddenly see their behavior much more clearly if you understand it as a scared child essentially throwing a tantrum. Number 7. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is one of the most famous models in the history of psychology. It employs a pyramid to show how certain human needs, like food, sleep, and warmth, are necessary to resolve before more aspirational needs like love, accomplishment, and vocation. The stages of Maslow's hierarchy of needs determine exactly what you're motivated by, depending on where you are in the hierarchy. The first stage is physiological fulfillment. This is easily seen in the daily life of an infant. All that matters to them is that their basic needs for survival are met, i.e., food, water, and shelter. Without security in these aspects, it is difficult for anyone to focus on satisfaction in anything else. It would actually be harmful to them to seek other forms of satisfaction. So this is the baseline level of fulfillment that must first be met. The second stage is safety. If someone's belly is full, they have clothes on their back, and they have a roof over their head, they need to find a way to ensure that those things keep on coming. They need to have a secure source of income or resources to increase the certainty and longevity of their safety. The first two stages are designed to ensure overall survival. Unfortunately, many people never make it out of these first two stages due to unfortunate circumstances, and you can plainly see why they aren't concerned with fulfilling their potential. The third stage is love and belonging. Now that your survival is ensured, you'll find that it is relatively empty without sharing it with people you care about. Humans are social creatures, and case studies have shown that living in isolation will literally cause insanity and mental instability. No matter how well-fed or secure you are, this includes relationships with your friends and family and socializing enough so you don't feel that you are failing in your social life. Of course, this stage is a major sticking point for many people. They are unable to be fulfilled or focus on higher desires because they lack the relationships that create a healthy lifestyle. Isn't it easy to imagine someone who is stuck at a low level of happiness because they don't have any friends? The fourth stage is self-esteem. You can have relationships, but are they healthy ones that make you feel confident and supported? This stage is all about how your interactions with others impact your relationship with yourself. This is a very interesting level of maturity in terms of needs, because it boils down to self-acceptance. You know you have a healthy level of self-esteem when you can accept yourself, even if you are misunderstood or outright disliked by others. For you to get to this stage and have a healthy level of self-esteem, you have to have accumulated certain achievements or earned the respect of others. There is a strong interplay between how you get along with others and help others and how you feel about yourself. The final stage is self-actualization. The highest level of Maslow's hierarchy is self-actualization. This is when you are able to live for something higher than yourself and your needs. You feel that you need to connect with principles that require you to step beyond what is convenient and what is comfortable. This is the plane of morality, creativity, spontaneity, lack of prejudice, and acceptance of reality. Self-actualization is placed at the top of the pyramid because this is the highest and last need people have. All the lower levels have to be met first before a person can reach this last level. You know you are working with somebody who operates at a truly high level when they do not focus so much on what is important to them, their self-esteem, or how other people perceive them. This is the stage people are at when they say they want to find their calling and purpose in life. Maslow's theory may not accurately describe all of our daily desires, but it does provide an inventory for the broad strokes of what we want in life. We can observe people to understand which stage of life they are in, what is currently important to them, and what they require to get to the next level in the hierarchy. Number 8. Body language, for instance, may be just as powerful a language to learn to read and comprehend as facial expressions. After all, the face is simply a part of the body. Why focus on just one part when people's postures and general movements can speak just as eloquently? Ex-FBI agent Joe Navarro is generally considered an authority in this field and has used his experience to teach others about the wealth of information people share without ever opening their mouths, i.e., what he calls nonverbal communication. Number 9. Just as we can understand any kind of communication, behavior, or speech from a person as a direct expression of their total selves, we can include personality into the mix too. Personality can be thought of as a persistent pattern of behavior over the long term. You might read a certain gesture or tone of voice to mean XYZ, but that same gesture or voice, when repeated reliably and often enough, starts to cement into a persona. It follows then that if we know a little about the persistent, lifelong pattern of general behavior, we have more context to help us understand the specific behavior we see in front of us at any one time. In psychological terms, personality is usually understood as a special blend of a person's unique traits, i.e., where they fall on multiple attitudinal continuums. Most personality theories are interested in the fundamental axes on which people differ. If you can get a handle on these basic nuts and bolts of human personality, the idea is that you gain greater insight into the behavior, perhaps even learning to preempt and predict it. Number 10. The Enneagram test was developed in the 1960s as a way for people to attain the focus is primarily on self-improvement because it forces people to face their own faults head-on. There are 9 types that can be identified when taking this test. Type 1. These types of people are usually concerned with always being right and have a high level of integrity. They can also be deemed as being judgmental and self-righteous. Examples include priests and doctors. Type 2. These people have a yearning to be loved and appreciated. They are usually very generous, but can also be seen as manipulative and prideful. Examples include mothers and teachers. Type 3. These types of people love to be praised and applauded. They are workaholics, which can make them narcissistic and vain. Examples include actors and students. Type 4. Typically, these types will search for meaning in their lives with a need to be unique. They are certainly creative but can also be moody and temperamental. Examples include musicians and painters. Type 5. These people strive to be knowledgeable and competent. Most of the time, they are very objective, but they have the tendency to hoard themselves away. An example includes researchers. Type 6. That these people are thoughtful in their planning and are very loyal to anyone they care about. They do question everything, and this can make them suspicious and paranoid. Examples include survivalists and police officers. Type 7. That these types of people like adventure and are very energetic. They make the best of everything, and this can force them to be reckless and overindulgent. Examples include thrill seekers and actors. Type 8. That these people always have to be in control or have power. They are assertive, which can come off as being aggressive and extreme. Examples include overbearing parents or people in the military. Type 9. Lastly, these people are stable and mediate situations. They're normally easygoing and accepting of all things, but this type of naive behavior can make them oblivious to negative things happening around them. Examples include hippies and grandparents.